Everybody for joining us, and welcome to this webinar. Now we're in the 6th year of this webinar series, the Data Science in the News. This webinar series is co-sponsored by the Queensland University of Technology, QUT, Centre for Data Science, and the Queensland Academy of the Arts and Sciences. This webinar series has continued to present expert, data-informed discussion on a wide range of topical issues over those years. I'm Kerry Mengerson. I'm an adjunct distinguished professor of statistics at QUT. I'm a member of our Centre for Data Science, and I'll be your host for today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the Turrbal and Yagara people as the First Nations owners of the lands where QUT now stands. I pay my respects to all elders, past, present, and emerging, and I recognise that the land here at QUT has always been a place of teaching, research and learning. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country from where you're joining us today. So to kick off our 2026 Data Science in the News series, in this webinar we're going to tackle one of the most pressing challenges currently facing most Australians, the cost of fuel. No, we're not going to delve into the why of the fuel increases. And importantly, we're not going to talk about the war in Iran or the international and national political actions and responses to this war. However, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the huge human impact of this war and indeed other wars that are being waged around the world. Our thoughts are with all of those who've been involved and are still being impacted by these events. But even when we focus our attention on the cost of fuel, there are still many data-informed social, business and economic directions and dimensions that we could explore. We can't cover all of these, of course, in this webinar, but we have convened a fantastic expert panel to cover a wide range of topics: public policy, modelling and forecasting fuel prices, impacts of fuel prices on transport and industry, influences on behaviours such as working from home, and implication for alternative energy sources. So, what a great hour we're looking forward to here. Let me introduce our panel. First, we have Dr. Ian Jeffries, who's in Policy Research and Development at RACQ. He's the Principal Policy Advisor and the Advocacy Lead for the organisation. He's got over 15 years of experience with RACQ, preceded by academic and government roles in the UK and Australia. I can't think of anyone who's more experienced and able to speak to the topic for today's webinar. Thank you very much for your time in joining us, Ian. Our next panellist is Dr. Mahdi Abolghasemi. He's a senior lecturer in Statistical Data Science at QUT. Mahdi specialises in time series forecasting, decision optimization and machine learning for retail and energy applications. Very relevant for today's webinar. His primary research areas include demand forecasting in supply chains, energy forecasting for renewable sources, and decision-focused predictive analytics. Welcome, Mahdi. Our next panellist is Associate Professor Dorina Poyani, who's a member of the School of Architecture, Design and Planning at the University of Queensland. Her research focuses on the built environment triad: urban design, mobility and housing. Alongside her academic role, she also publishes broadly in non-academic outlets. So welcome, Dorina. And our last panellist is Associate Professor Dezo Serro. He's a member of the School of Electrical Engineering and Robotics at QUT. He's a member of QUT's Power Engineering Group, and his research interests include renewable clean energy generation through PV and solar systems. So again, a great member of our panel to be talking about this aspect of the topic. Welcome, Dezo. So we have these 4 panellists, and the webinar will proceed as follows. I'm going to ask each panellist in turn to speak for about 5 minutes on the topic of fuel prices based on their area of expertise. We'll then have some discussion, a collective discussion, and then we'll open the floor to questions from you, the audience. So please feel free to ask questions in the webinar chat. The panel members may respond during the webinar or will be able to address these questions in the Q&A session. And if we run out of time, we'll endeavour to answer them after the webinar. Please ensure that your questions are respectful, data-oriented, and in line with the webinar focus, as I've described. So let's get started. I'm going to kick off with you, Ian, and actually I've got 3 questions for you. First, given your long experience in RACQ and your current role as the Principal Policy Advisor, you've undoubtedly seen many fluctuations in fuel prices in the past. Is the fuel price increase that we're experiencing now any different? And if so, in what way? My second question is, how do you know this? What data does RACQ collect, and what role does it play in facilitating RACQ objectives and activities? And my third question for you is, why and how do fuel prices vary across the country? Over to you, Ian.
Cool. So start off with the current pricing that we're seeing now and what we've seen over the last couple of months. Look, we have seen a sharp break in how fuel is priced and the price that we're seeing at the bowsers. Before coming up to February of this year and going back for as long as we've got data, the Brisbane market has been dominated by a price cycle. It's an asymmetric sawtooth pattern, lasts for about 6 to 8 weeks. At the low point in the cycle, the average retail price in Greater Brisbane will be a cent or two above the average wholesale price. Then we'll see a sharp increase where individual sites jump their prices up by about 40 to 50 cents. And then a gradual decrease. So this is the pattern that we've seen in Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne for probably about the last 10 years. Prior to that, we saw a weekly cycle, cheap prices on a Tuesday, expensive prices on a Wednesday, discounting through the rest of the week. That's the cycle that we still see in Perth. So that's what the market looked like up until the end of February this year. When the conflict started in the Middle East, we saw oil prices rise dramatically when the straits were closed and we weren't getting that supply, and that's about 20% of the world's supply. So that saw a sharp increase in oil prices. Following on from that, we saw similar increases in the Singapore benchmark prices, which are the Asia Pacific benchmark for refined product. And because the Asia Pacific region takes more product out of the Middle East, the Singapore prices were more greatly affected than those elsewhere in the world. That's flowed through to the retail market. And what we saw certainly through March and into early April was oil ticking up, Singapore increasing, our local wholesale price increases, and the retailers were following suit. The retail industry reported a change in their pricing behavior. Normally it was a cost plus, so they'll get their fuel, they'll purchase their fuel, they'll add their margin, and that's more or less the price that you see at the bowser, to a replacement cost. So, and this was the reason that the fuel industry is given for those initial sharp increases. So rather than the cost that we're paying at the bowser being the price that they paid plus a margin, they're looking to price it to replace the next tanker load worth of fuel. So that's the reason why the fuel industry has given for those sharper increases. Not 100% convinced, but that's the industry reason. At the moment, petrol in Brisbane is priced at about $1.85 a litre. So we have seen some decreases through April. Diesel's still expensive at about $2.60 a litre. So that's where we're sitting at the moment. In terms of the data that RACQ collects and uses, so we get a bit of history. So back in 2018, the Queensland government introduced a mandatory fuel price reporting regime. all fuel retailers in Queensland are required to report their prices in almost real time, and they have to report to a company called Informed Sources, who the Queensland government has engaged to run the scheme. So we get very rich data on the retail space. So uh, you know, we've got hourly data for all and hourly pricing data for all sites in Queensland. Uh, we also get average terminal gate prices, that average wholesale price, so we can look at that difference, and that difference is important to sort of, let's say, where we're at in the cycle, and more importantly about how we give advice to our members about fuel pricing. So using that data, so there's two major ways that we use that data. One is in the advocacy division, which is in the division that I work for. That informs our policy work, but it also informs our media work and our consumer advice. So we're sometimes a bit too often you'll see me or one of my colleagues in the media talking about the price of petrol, giving advice about looking at the cycle, whether this is a good time to buy or not, but also our automated systems, the RACQ fuel prices app, and the related uh, version on the website. It's looking at the prices in the market at the moment. It's looking at where the average the average retail price is compared to wholesale. It's calculating the lowest quartile price, and then it's using those pieces of data to deliver advice about whether now is a good time to fill up or not. So that app is automated. There's a data engine that sits on the website, and it's constantly ingesting that data and then delivering that advice to our members. So that's kind of our main use for the fuel price data. Third question, how and why do prices vary around the country? I think the biggest difference is the markets that have a price cycle and those markets that do not. So our five largest capital cities all have that price cycle, that asymmetric sawtooth price cycle. Cycles in Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne look very similar. They're long, the amplitude 6 to 8 weeks, the amplitude is about 40 to 50 cents. Those markets all look and behave very similarly. Perth, on the other hand, is the only market where there is price regulation. So retailers are required to hold their price for 24 hours and report it to the WA government in advance. That has locked in a weekly cycle. The last cycling market is Adelaide. So Adelaide has a lot more of the small chains and independents compared to Brisbane. And they tend to discount their prices a lot quicker than the majors do. So we see a sharp increase followed by almost a similarly sharp decrease in the Adelaide market, and then prices stay close to wholesale for a few weeks, and then we see another hike. The other difference is our regional centres, and that would include Hobart, Canberra, and Darwin. They behave like regional markets, as do all of the regional centres throughout Queensland, and they're flat from day to day. Of course, they rise and fall with the oil price and Singapore prices, but largely flat and no cycles. So that's what it looks like at the moment.
Oh, thank you, Ian. That's very interesting and very revealing to hear how the different patterns are across the country. I know that RACQ has called for fuel market regulation. So what type of regulation would you like to see and why?
So our concern is that these longer and more extreme cycles aren't really delivering meaningful competition into the market. Look, they seem to give a thin veneer of competition. Prices go up, prices fall down, and they undercut each other. But when we look at these markets, especially compared to Perth, the average margin in Brisbane, so the absolute difference between the terminal gate price and the wholesale price, is about twice what we see in Perth. So in Perth, it sits about 10, 11 cents. In Brisbane, 22, 23 cents per litre. So that's our main concern. The regulation that we're looking at, and with your team, we're in the middle of currently modeling that, is around Perth-like models where retailers have to report and then report in an information poor environment and then hold their price for a set period of time. But also we're looking at caps onto how much they would be allowed to increase on any given day. And we think a combination of these, it will add competition to the market. I think what we see at the moment is that there's very strong behavior. Retailers follow the same pattern month in, month out, and it doesn't encourage them to compete on price. So putting some restrictions about how and when they can change their price, we believe this will force them to, look at their operations, look at their business model and to lean out that business model and to offer the most competitive price day in, day out.
Thanks very much, Ian. That's very interesting. We're really fortunate to have RACQ and the sister entities in other states of Australia on our side and going into this. I'd like to turn now to Mahdi. Mahdi, you've been using your expertise in data science, machine learning and forecasting to analyse RACQ data to better understand the Queensland fuel market and to consider the potential impact of alternative government policies. I understand this study is still in progress, so the results are not yet public. But can you tell us at a high level about the study and perhaps some of your findings? What are the main patterns in fuel prices among Queensland retailers, and what role do consumers play in modulating these prices? And why is forecasting fuel prices so difficult?
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I think Ian explained the problem very well. The pattern that we see in the market is an Edgeworth cycle. Basically, if you're driving a petrol car like me, you would see that when you're driving around the city, and you would see these prices for different stations. And what we see the pattern is, we see a sharp increase usually every now and then. Cycle is around 6 weeks or so. But then a gradual decline in price that happens over time. So this behavior, basically, what it is doing is increasing the average price up for consumers. And that by itself, if you compare it with other states, we would see that average petrol is a little bit more expensive in here in Queensland. And from consumer sides may not be ideal because it takes a bit of time. If you look at 6 weeks cycle lengths that we have, consumers usually fill in their tank in 1 or 2 weeks, and they can't wait for 6 weeks to get another sort of a cycle with a low price to fill in their tank. So from consumer sides may not be ideal. And what we have been doing, we've been looking at the data, and we've been looking at a lot of information, and we've had a lot of meetings with Ian and team looking into the problem. And we've developed a model to look into this. This is a challenging forecasting problem because if you look at the market, there is hundreds of stations that they make decisions independently. Different retailers, they make decisions independently. It's a free market, so they can set their prices. But of course, there's a lot of elements that comes into their pricing and the price that we would see out there in the market. But also consumers play a role because we've got millions of consumers, travelers going around every day in Queensland, and they're looking for the cheapest stations. Obviously, most of them possibly are looking for the cheapest stations. But this creates an interaction in the market between consumers and stations. Stations obviously want to have their own profit, but consumers want to have cheap petrol for their needs. So this creates a sort of an interaction that for that we have developed the simulation models. We have looked at a number of different scenarios. with a lot of expertise input from RACQ side, and we have looked at a number of different regulations and how they can possibly impact the market. Now, of course, this is continuing and it hasn't been finished yet, but we're looking forward to continuation of research in the next few months and see what would be a good outcome.
Okay, thank you, Mahdi. That's interesting. I'm interested also, based on your broader research, what do you think the fuel supply chain system is like now, or situation is like now? Mm-hmm. And do you think we've passed the disruption? What do you see in the data and your research?
Yeah, so what we see in the market now, we can see easing in prices, which is good from consumers' perspective. But there is still these major geopolitical issues that we see, and they are still causing some issues for the logistics and supply chain. Obviously, this hasn't been resolved fully, and that has some implications. So we might see some more volatility in the market. The price is down, but it is likely again to see a longer period of volatility in the market in prices that we see. Countries have moved to thinking about alternative paths and stabilizing the demand and balance in the market. In Australia, we had some measurements. Consumers and people actually helped with using more public transport and some other measurements that we had in the market that helps to ease the demand side and take some of that constraints that we have at the moment in the supply side. We don't have so much supply side issue, but it is more sort of a logistic issue. The production facilities still are there. They're operating mostly without any issues, but of course, the logistic issue that we have is causing this issue. So I would say we haven't fully moved away from it, although we have seen some good signs in the market. I would expect to see some volatility in the market for the next while or so.
Okay, thank you, Mahdi. It's very cool to see how data science can support the work of RACQ and how these partnerships with universities can, how effective they can be in tackling some of our major social issues. So thank you for your comments. I'm going to turn now to you, Dorina. So as I noted in your introducing you, you've been very successful in communicating your research and your perspectives on topical issues to the public. Can you tell us a little bit about your work in general? And following that, can you tell us the answer to the question that you posed in your excellent article published recently in The Conversation, should the government encourage people to work from home to save fuel? Over to you, Dorina.
Yes, thanks, Gary, for that nice introduction. As an academic and as a person living in the age of public crisis, I'm very critical myself of automobility and generally the kind of high energy consumption lifestyles that we have in the West. So some of my recent work, there's lots that I do. I mean, I cover also housing and urban design, not just transport, but a lot of my recent work on transport has taken this radical approach, looking at the car-free city, the possibility of the car-free city as a lifestyle for the future, rather than continue with the current paradigm of car-based mobility and just tinkering around the edges, providing one little bike lane here and one bus lane there, etc. Okay, so some of the work that I've done with students and colleagues here at UQ has looked at how people might live in a city like Brisbane if they didn't use a car. And we've looked, a few years ago, we've looked at people that had voluntarily gone car-free to see how they were managing about their day without us intervening. And more recently, we actually got some people to sign up for a project and try car-free living for a few weeks. So we found that even when people are very highly motivated to live car-free, it's not a lifestyle that comes easily to people in a place like Brisbane. So as planners, we find ourselves in a bind. On one hand, we want to wean people from automobility, but then we haven't created the conditions in the city, the physical conditions to make that lifestyle possible. So even people who really want to do it have realized that it involves a lot of planning. Living without a car, you can't be as spontaneous. Potentially, you're subject to judgment from others. Why aren't you driving like everyone else? Why do you need to be counterculture in this sort of society? If you're a woman, are you a princess? Is your husband driving you around? Or why aren't you not giving your kids all the opportunities in life by driving them to activities in the suburb, their guitar lesson and their ballet lesson, etc., which might be far from home. So you have to deal with a lot. But we found that even people that find it quite difficult to be car free, if they experience this lifestyle, chances are they might go car light. And our intervention, like I said, only lasted a few weeks. So if we can get a few people to go car light with just a few week trial, 20 days to be precise, then imagine how much more we could achieve if we could extend this sort of lifestyle and also give people a lot more incentives, provide them with better public transport, better access to active transport, safe access to active transport, and importantly, also with the opportunity to work from home. So that's been another area of research that I've looked into. We've crunched the numbers with data from the pandemic because that's when a lot of people worked from home. I mean, now it's being considered, but it's not being done as much. So the pandemic is where we could really look at the before and after. And we found that there are huge benefits to individuals and actually to the private sector as well. Lots of savings if people start working from home in mass. In fact, the one loser there might be the government itself, because public transport would be at a loss, of course, if lots of people work from home. So at this point, working from home, in my view as a planner, should be considered a commute mode. When we do those questionnaires and ask people how do you get to work, well, that could be one option. Work from home, 0 kilometers traveled. So yeah, I'd say the picture is not looking very rosy, but there are reasons for hope.
That's very interesting. So where did you get your data from for the studies that you did for the work from home?
For the work from home, that included a variety of sources. There's a lot of things we had to estimate, a lot of items we had to estimate as proxies. So we dug up all kinds of databases, both public sector and private sector.
Right. Okay. It's very interesting, Dorina. Thank you so much. It's great to learn about some of these many important outcomes from these fuel disruptions and thinking about what this future might look like. Mahdi, I believe that you've also investigated aspects of this as well. So based on your research, how could consumers behave or help in times of supply chain disruption?
Yeah, I think the study that Dorina has in working from home is an excellent example of how we can actually address this issue. There were some measurements from, I know some organizations and encouragement from government side to work from home. And that is effective to basically reduce the demand that we see in the market. These are little things that they pile up. And if you think about the demand side, it can actually have a massive impact to reduce that imbalance that we see in demand and supply in the market. So one other thing that I would like to say is just, when we have these disruptions in the market, other things that consumers can do is to avoid panic buying. And that behavior just adds a bit more volatility to the issue. One or two individuals may benefit from that, but it will come in the cost. If you look at the whole bigger picture, it will come in the cost for the whole society. So I would say knowing your role, what to do in times of disruptions to ease that demand side would be really beneficial for supply chain.
Okay, thank you, Mahdi. Dorina, I'm going to come back to you and your future, in which we're free of cars altogether. But how does Australia compare to other countries in terms of trying to go car-free?
Well, so some of my research, that's a really good question, because some of my research has been comparative. Some has been very Brisbane-centric, but there have been comparisons to other countries. And coincidentally, the comparison settings have been in the Middle East, where the war is happening at the moment. And we have found that compared to those settings, Australia actually does better, because we do have a bit of public transport. Our public transport systems are not great compared to, say, East Asia, countries like Japan, Korea, China, or Europe. But compared to the Middle East, they're much better. In the Middle East, they've sort of not provided much alternative transport, because they have lots of oil and oil is cheap, so there is much more driving than in Australia. But that said, it doesn't mean that should be our role model. Our role model should be Europe, East Asia, if we want to progress towards a car-free future.
Okay, thank you. And I guess in those countries, then, are you seeing patterns of towards a car-free future?
Very little, very little. If in Australia there is a bit of awareness, not a lot, but there is some awareness, I'd say in those countries it's a lot less. A lot of people that we talk to, that we involved in our work, simply do not consider that possibility. There is this strong attachment to the system of automobility, and it's not just a technical attachment, or the fact that you have a sunk cost. You've purchased the car, so now you have to use it. But there is also an emotional attachment. There is a psychological dimension there.
Yeah, thank you. And there's quite a lot to think about, isn't there, when we look to this future? Speaking of the future and of future change and potential disruptions, I'm going to turn to you. And given your experience in alternative energy sources, what does the future look like with respect to renewable clean energy generation in Australia? And has the current fuel price disruption had an impact on that? And if so, in what way?
Thank you, Kerry. For that, before looking at the future, I would like to take a look at where we are now, how we got here. I have a few slides, if I may share my screen. So, yes, I would like to start with a positive note, is that we are a solar superpower in the world. So in terms of installed solar capacity per capita, we are world leaders. We have been for the last few years. And even in terms of absolute installed capacity size of the solar market, we are in the top 15 in the world, which is remarkable, considering that we are a country of 25 million. So in terms of solar, we are doing really well. And in terms of renewables, in terms of installed capacity, we can say that in the last decade or so, the renewables surged. So, and this growth was primarily driven by solar and wind. For example, from 2014 to 2024, the installed capacity for PV grew roughly 10 times, and wind grew about 4 times. So we have some hydro as well, and bioenergy, and they have been around for quite a while, but they didn't show a lot of growth in this last decade. So the growth is primarily driven by these two main technologies, solar and wind. In terms of how we are doing with the renewable energy, or renewable electricity rather, generation mix, considering the total electricity generation in the country, we are again tracking quite nicely. So at the end of 2025, we are roughly in per year basis, we are about 40%, 43% roughly. The generation is coming from renewables, and as a milestone, which is quite remarkable, in the last quarter in 2025, renewable produced more than half of the total generation in the national electricity market. the national electricity market being all the states in Australia except for Western Australia and Northern Territory. So we are tracking quite nicely. So there is reason for optimism. If we are looking at the future and what are the targets, so we of course we want to get to net zero, and the good news is that Australia does have a clear goal to reach net zero emissions that is economy-wide by 2050. There is an intermediate goal for a federal level to reach 82% renewable electricity generation by 2030. And as you can see, that is relatively close. So we have some work to do if we want to reach that. And in terms of emissions, the intermediate goal for 2030 is to reach 43% below the 2005 levels, and roughly 60 to 70% below the 2005 level by 2035. So that one, we are tracking that one, I would say probably okay. We may or we may not make that target. For Queensland, Queensland used to have renewable electricity share goals as well. Now they don't have a statutory limit for that, but they do have economy-wide emissions target. So for 2030, it is for 30% below 2005 levels. We already reached that actually in, I think, 2023. So we are around 35% by now, and the aim is to reach 75% by 2035, right? So what I would say is that at this point, the debate is shifting from technology to system delivery, right? So the technology is I would say that it's mostly available. It is there. It is a matter of how these systems can be delivered, how they can be integrated into the broader network cost effectively and timely. And now to take a look at how the fuel prices, particularly this recent spike in fuel prices, have impacted renewables. I would say that for most Australia, for most of the country, the effect is indirect by strengthening the case for electrification, energy storage, and domestic clean energy. So it brings the conversation a bit forward on this. Particularly, a more observable effect might be on electrification of the transportation, electric vehicles, which can be charged from homes' solar energy systems. So therefore, that will be shielded from this fuel price spike. And of course, energy security. Renewables can reduce the exposure to imported fuel. So this becomes a more, again, brings the conversation more in the forefront on this topic. In terms of, so for most Australians, this is indirect, but for remote communities, I would say that the effect of these fuel prices is more direct, because currently there is approximately 500,000 Australians who live in remote communities, and many of them still rely on diesel generators for electricity. And for these communities, solar and energy storage are not only for a longer term emissions reduction, but it is a very direct way for affordable, local, and reliable generation. So for them, this crisis will make it even more important to transition from the diesel generators towards solar and energy storage or local generation, basically, for these communities. Yes, so this is where we are now.
Thank you, Deza. So a question around that then, what are the main barriers? Like you paint this picture of us doing very well in terms of trying to reach our goals. But what are the, and obviously that gets harder and harder as you get to the more ambitious goals. But what are some of the main barriers at the moment in adopting some of these new technologies?
So we are at the point where the cost of solar and wind generation is really competitive with coal. So it is the cost is really actually below that of the traditional generation. The challenge is becoming the system integration, and because the more of these generations we have, the more of the part of the generation is not controllable. So we have energy when the sun is shining and when there is wind, and it is important that the key enabling technology here would be energy storage. So both batteries for shorter term storage, but also longer term storage, daily, weekly, or even seasonal as we progress. This is where other than batteries, other technologies like pumped hydro, large scale storage, or green hydrogen, or other type of technologies can play a role. And there is probably not going to be a silver bullet for one technology. There will be probably a mix. Another key requirement here is transmissions. So that we can move renewable energy from areas when there is a lot of generation towards load centers, right? So these are a key requirements, I would say, for further increase of the share of renewables in the network, and with all these grid integration. So to coordinate all this, because a very big difference from the traditional generation system to the new one is that in the traditional system, we had a few large generators which are well controlled and coordinated together. But now with renewables, we have thousands, or in case of rooftops, we have millions of generators that are each connecting to the grid and feeding power in there. And their coordination will become really important. And I would say that data science will have an important role to actually handle that.
And so just pushing on that a little bit more, how do you see, how does the high renewable penetration actually change this role of data science in managing the power network? So, when you talk about it being important, how is it important?
So it is important because, as I said, it's a sheer number of generators that need to be managed is increased exponentially because of the way that these generators work. So one key aspect is what Mahdi knows a lot about is forecasting. So forecasting generation, but forecasting also loads, as well as the way that energy storage would interact with the network, and including major weather events, for example, and so on. So forecasting to understand what's coming is going to be very important. Visibility. So there will be, so as just to say, I like this example, rooftop solar, because Australia is the top market in rooftop solar in the world. We have a very large number of generators behind the meters to which we don't have, or the system operators do not have direct access as measurement. So estimating or using data science to understand what's happening there behind the meter, it will be very important. Again, this is a large number of systems that are connected to the network, and again, for coordinating a very large number of systems, traditional modeling approaches start to fall short simply because of the sheer number of systems that are connected to the network, as well as the fact that their behavior is often defined by their internal control system rather than a well-known physical law, for example, like synchronous generators that the traditional power plants are working with. So
okay,
this is,
thank you.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, Deso. So just riffing off that a bit, Ian, RACQ's talked a lot about the impact of renewables on fuel prices and supply. And so what role does RACQ or you see for biofuels such as ethanol blended petrol, renewable diesel in Australia?
Yes, so I think when we're looking at the transport task, a lot of the or the vast majority of passenger vehicles, are well suited for electrification. So, in the passenger vehicle task, we think, electric vehicles are going to dominate moving forward. I think when we get to the edges of the system, when we're looking at work vehicles in regional and remote Queensland and through the rest of Australia and through the tropics more widely, we think this is where we're going to need a liquid fuel in an ongoing capacity. Look, the electricity networks get very thin and long when we get to regional centres. So yeah, large scale electrification probably is not going to work. So in these centres, we've been considering, if we need a liquid fuel, well, how can we provide the lowest carbon liquid fuel? So in the dual cab ute, which really is the workhorse of regional Queensland and regional Australia, we think an ethanol blended fuel, especially E85, which is 85% ethanol and 15% mineral petrol, is the most suitable fuel. Look, we have ethanol production in Australia. We have E85 already in the supply chain. Look, it's a race fuel, so but there are, you can buy E85 throughout Queensland, especially along the coastal strip. So I think, E85 in combination with electrification. So the primary power source and the primary drivetrain would be 100. We expect, or would be 100% electric, and the liquid fuel would there essentially to run a smaller generator to add that additional range. So like when we move up into the heavy vehicle space, look, renewable diesel is, it is available. It is a drop-in fuel. It's chemically the same as mineral fuel, and we think, in for heavy logistics, for longer trip and heavy truck freight, renewable diesel is probably the most likely outcome. Look, it's good to see that the Queensland government's putting money into renewable diesel plant at Ampol's refinery at Lytton. So I think that's what we see as the most likely outcome.
Okay, thank you. Mahdi and Dorina, do you want to add to this vision of renewables in the future from your perspectives, from your research?
I have a question for Ian, actually. You hear sometimes with things like biofuels, there is this concern about how much agricultural land do we want to devote to the production of biofuels versus the production of food.
Yeah.
What's your sense there?
Look, I think there is. Look, I recognize, there is that concern, and I think, it is a very reasonable and genuine concern. I think as we're sitting at the moment, ethanol is, the best feedstock for ethanol is sugarcane, and we have a lot of sugarcane. I don't think we would see too much change in the price of sugar if we were to shift more sugarcane production into ethanol production. Look, sugar is something we all enjoy, but probably should eat a little bit less of. So I think the ethanol production really isn't going to be a problem. I think more concerning is the shift of oily crops into diesel production. Look, at the moment, so renewable diesel's made from canola oil, and it's made from waste animal fat. So the waste animal fat, that's a waste stream, and I don't think there's any problems there. Look, there is some interaction with soap production because a lot of animal fat goes into making soap, but looking at the numbers, that doesn't seem to be too significant. Currently, we export canola oil to renewable diesel plants in the Asia Pacific region. I know Neste import Australian canola oil for their plant in the Philippines. So, look, potentially there is more work that needs to be done to make sure that isn't impacting food prices. Look, it's not fully my area of expertise, but I think, you know, it's the oily crops where we could see a problem. I know there is some work doing for non-food oil seeds, and I know some of your colleagues at the University of Queensland have got a trial out near Gatton from memory, where they're using ongamia, which is a common street tree used in Brisbane here, and it has an oily seed that could be used for biodiesel. It's a non-edible oil. So, you know, I think that's the area where we should be focusing, and you know, there's a lot of work in this area. So overall, I think the food versus fuel is a problem. It is certainly a problem, but I think it's one that we can solve.
Thank you, and thank you for the question, Dorina, and for the answer, considered answer, Ian. Mahdi, would you like to contribute to this part of the conversation?
Yeah, just adding on top of what Ian and Bezo already mentioned. So I just want to acknowledge that these problems, the forecasting problems, and we're looking at 2030 or 2050, these are really challenging forecasting problems, especially when it comes to renewables. Even short-term prediction is difficult because we are dealing with, basically wholly uncertain situations that when the wind is blowing and when the sun is shining, these are things that are challenging inherently to forecast. And when it comes to long-term planning, looking at 2030 or 2050 for a strategic planning, we still have those challenges there. So just acknowledging that these are interesting, challenging problems, but we're working on them all, and I'm optimistic for the future.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, I think there's a lot that we have some good data for modelling, and but also then the complications of modelling for the current time period, for the short term, and then for forecasting for the longer term, certainly. I'll just open the floor then with one question, which is around just the data gaps. So, you know, as researchers and also as industry bodies, where are the data gaps? Where do we need more data or information, or do we already have enough in these kinds of conversations around fuel prices and the future of fuel in Australia? Would anybody like to speak to that?
If I must start off, I think, you know, when it comes to the modelling of the retail market, we do have a lot of data about how the retailers behave, but we have less data about how the consumers behave, whether that's in terms of certainly when thinking about the market modelling that's currently going, where and when do people buy their petrol? Look, we have some limited data from that we bought from credit card terminals, but I think, you know, what in a wider context, what does the transport task actually look like? Who drives what and where for what reason? How many people are using public transport? Probably something we have better data on, but how many people are walking and riding? So I think there is scope there to better understand what that transport task actually is, and then how do we respond to that, and how, yeah.
Okay, fine, thank you. And that sort of speaks to some of your work too, then, Dorina. Yeah, would you like to?
Yes. I wanted to add to that yes, it's important to know what people are doing, exactly what they're doing, including work from home, 0-kilometer commutes. But I think we also need to get better at finding out what the latent demand is for alternative forms of transport, right? Because if we look at Brisbane as it is now, we might be assuming that everyone just loves driving, but that is not the case. There are people that do it because they have to, but they'd rather be doing something else. And there are people who do live in areas where they could potentially give up their car, but they're not for a variety of complex social psychology reasons. So the latent demand, we want to know what could potentially be happening if we made certain changes to our built environment, or if we provided people with certain incentives rather than based our predictions just on people's past behavioral patterns.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's it's very interesting in terms of data opportunities and the need for those kind of data. Mahdi, from your perspective.
Just adding on top of the data issues that we have, consumer sides, even if you look at the renewable energy in the long term, like Desa mentioned, we are dealing with a decentralized market. Now we have millions of renewable energy generators, basically. And one big issue, of course, is access to this data to understand what is happening, how much production we would have in the market. There is concerns around, of course, the security of this data and sensitivity of the data. There's all issues around those things, but we have also some methodologies that they will be able to actually mask some of this data, but use them for the benefit of the society.
Yeah, thank you, Mahdi. And I think that's really important about how we actually deal with these data and the data governance as well. Deso, from your perspective, where are the data gaps?
Yes, so I completely agree with Mahdi. One of the gaps or a challenge is to have access to the data that is just the generation data from the many systems that are sitting behind meters, where the data belongs to a private person. So it's even the de-anonymizing might be challenging, because the production pattern and so on can still have some privacy implications there, and people might be reluctant to share this because they own this data. For larger scale, in terms of renewables, so this is particularly for residential systems, for example. For large scale PV plants, there is a quite advanced SCADA system, so that data monitoring and plant management system, and there is plenty of data. And of course, it also belongs to the plant owner, but the same privacy challenges might not be there. I did talk with plant operators who actually were concerned that they have so much data that they don't actually know what to do with it. So they cannot really take advantage of all that data. So they have environmental monitoring, irradiance, temperature, weather, everything, production profiles, everything is there. But in many cases, they don't actually have the tools to take advantage of all this data. And now, particularly with new systems having also energy storage, that kind of data, and to use that using data science or AI approaches might bring in much more value.
Yeah, thank you. I think that you've really all touched on excellent points. I mean, the current situation, the in terms of fuel prices and the supply chain, and also then the what the future might look like, and then also the role of data and what we need in terms of getting better data to be able to make more informed decisions and provide and support the policies that entities like RACQ would like to put in place. So that really brings us then to the end of this webinar. Thank you to all of the speakers, and thank you very much to the Queensland Academy of the Arts and Sciences and for QUT Centre for Data Science for sponsoring this series. And a special thank you to Ashley Stewart, our Centre for Data Science Manager, who's done all the hard work behind the scenes, and for Chantel Toms, who's also been supporting this. Please tune into our next Data Science in the News webinar, which will be organised by the Queensland Academy of the Arts and Sciences. The details will be announced very soon. And with that, bye for now, and may data and data science continue to fuel the news. Bye.